Okay, dear friends, welcome back to Design Factory and to our lecture. Today our title is Pulp Wisdom. Thank you very much for the concentration, for the focus, the energy during the first lecture we had here. Also, I noticed that quite a few people have found the video that was prepared by Master Raskinen. That's been out just for basically one day, but it's already been downloaded 500 times. That to me is a fair amount. So thanks a lot for that. Today we'll go, as far as my lecture part is concerned, we will go in two parts again, like the first time. And I try to go quite tightly and quite inspiringly, I hope. Also, some of the themes I'm going to cover, I think, are extremely important and also in some ways disturbing even. But at the same time, I hope that we can create here the kind of tenderness or feeling of gentleness, alongside with desire to do something dynamic, like during the first time. This idea of tender dynamism being one of the chief ideas I try to bring to a situation where we meet with other people and hopefully get something for our own endeavors from those other people, as well as some insight into ourselves. But in order to get ourselves going, let me first observe that we have here the great Nelli Lähteenmäki. She's the co-founder of UApp that we use as our digital platform. So in case you have some questions regarding the platform, please turn to Nelli during the break or after my part is through. She is also, like Nora, she is a graduate from Aalto University and my former student. I'm extremely proud of Nelli. She being also a prominent startup lady here in Finland, and it's also great to welcome Timo Torikka as a guest here. Timo is a great actor, obviously, and a good friend. So it's great to have him here. That Timo's teaching at the arts school. So. In order to get ourselves going, please stand up and generate beautiful power hugs and cheek kisses and maybe just shaking hands, whatever forms of saying hello tenderly and dynamically. This is how the film Pulp Fiction, Tarantino's film Pulp Fiction, starts with an explanation of the word pulp. And of course, for us Finns, us being great pulp manufacturers, and I believe we have built much of our national wealth on pulp. It's an interesting word, this kind of idea that sort of you prepare, but it's only the beginning, and it could be that it is in some sense not really that valued. So like in the word pulp fiction, you refer to something that is likely to be of poor quality. So to me this is exciting because, of course, quite a lot of the things that we experience in our life are sort of like not that quality intensive necessarily. It could be it's so everyday is to something so mundane that you don't really start to orient yourself from the point of view of that being something interesting or something extraordinary. Like I noticed this little posting from somebody in our group in our UApp campfire, where the person is describing the time when he or she had walking sticks because there was something wrong with his or her walking. So there were these walking sticks, but and you know, you walk around with the sticks you normally don't use. It's sort of like a little bit of a drag probably. But then when crossing a street, another person comes who is in a similar situation, and the person looks at the first person, our person, with a kind of a look that conveys something. And if you think about our first lecture, in particular the video featuring Plácido Domingo, the great Spanish tenor, alongside with Jubin Mehta, the great Indian conductor. So that was one of our prominent examples from the first lecture. But if you think about what happened there in terms of the clans, you see that this subtle phenomenon of potentially considerable dynamism. And our participant here reports of having experienced such dynamism. And going back to that experience, now as a result of having, as it were, re-entered the experience, as a result of our seminar here, our lecture situation here, is something I hope would happen, that kind of a structure. So you're visiting something that you have already experienced, and then finding from that experience something that you can perhaps go to the future slightly more enriched with. Remember, it's your experience, so in principle, whatever enrichment it can bring in some sense could be there already. But of course, that's not the way we are constituted. We are for some reason constituted in such a way that if we are reminded of something in a particular kind of way, let's say a poem, that being one of the key examples from our first lecture as well, the Mandela example, where Mandela is talking about a particular poem that gave him strength, is possible for a human being. So what I would hope to happen during this lecture event, perhaps as you go back to the lecture event through the video, or if you go into the digital platform, the campfire, and even if you don't do it, if you just sort of pay attention to this aspect of you as a human being, the ability to re-enter an experience that has more value to it than perhaps you originally thought, from the point of view of continuing in a more enriched way from this moment onwards. But it's your experience you are there dealing with, using your thought instrument as the way to get more out of that already that experience already in your possession. Now, with this in mind, let me go directly to our first video cut. This is going to be, I hope, pretty illuminating, perhaps in some ways amusing too. It's from Tarantino's film Pulp Fiction, and of course it's a film that in some ways has been pretty revolutionary, also in terms of its structure, because the film itself doesn't follow the events linearly. So it starts where it ends, and it's actually somewhat difficult to follow exactly what happens there. But each of the episodes is so exciting that you end up just watching it, even if you don't really know what's going on, which to me is a reminder of the way it might be good to work with our experience. You don't really know what's going on, but you still want to go into the experience. Now, in this particular instance, what we have is two guys, and the two guys are hitmen for a godfather type of criminal boss named Marcellus. And the guys are on a mission, but they are ambushed, and when one guy unloads his gun at a very close range at the two guys, but misses both, which is astonishing. So you could say something astonishing happens, and always when something astonishing happens, you could say, well, you can sort of start to think about the astonishing that happened. But it's also equally possible not to think about the something that happened because you don't necessarily recognize it as that astonishing. I mean, you might have sticks and you cross a street that's just completely ordinary. So you might not sort of stop at the beauty of the spring or autumn or anything, you know. Somebody thinks a symphony is something that, you know, it really mesmerizes you. The other one doesn't think that much about it at all. In this case, so you have two guys. And the two guys have just missed a situation where, in principle, either one should have been hit, but nobody was hit. So the other one, Jules, is reflecting on what just happened. The other guy, Vincent, played by John Travolta, doesn't think that much of it. I mean, all kinds of things happen. So we go into the car and check their conversation on the theme. There's also a third guy in the back seat. So let's take a look at this episode from the film Pulp Fiction. Okay, I'll stop it there. Now, if you think about the situation where you wash your hands, and after washing your hands, you dry the hands in a towel. It's possible that the towel becomes dirty. Now, after the towel has become dirty, you can ask, well, why is the towel dirty? And a possible answer is because of the soap that I used for washing my hands. Had there been some other type of soap, I might have been in a position to wash my hands better, with the result that the towel wouldn't be dirty. A possible line of thought. Similarly, you're discussing some theme with your good friend at the front seat of a car. And let's say it's one of those cars in the old days that Americans loved, that has this kind of one front seat. So not two separate front seats, just one front seat. So sort of American limo type of a car. So you're discussing some theme with your good friend there, the front seat. But you don't reach a conclusion. So given the fact that there is somebody in the back seats, a good friend of yours perhaps, you turn to the person, but you're a polite person, you know, you don't want to be rude, so you turn towards the person in the back seat. But because you happen to have a gun in your hand, given the fact that you turn towards the guy, which is polite, you turn towards the guy, your gun sort of follows physically. And should it be the case that that gun that follows physically happens to unload with the result that the guy's head who is in the back seat is blown around the car, one can ask, well, why did that happen? And the possible answer is because the driver hit the bump. And this is because of the fact that you didn't really intend to kill the guy. So surely there's got to be some explanation other than the fact that you would have sort of done that advertently. So if you think about the Vincent Vega principles, you could say, this is principle number one, blame somebody else. The good news is you're going to find somebody to blame. I mean, we have a little sort of visitors' toilet in our flat. and it's a very small one. And I quite like it, but it's a very, very small one. Now, when our boys were born, the boys that are now 28, the queen, the special lady, made a general ruling over the kingdom to the effect that anybody that comes to our home immediately washes his or her hands. There are no exceptions at all, which was quite impressive because we know a lot of people. So some of the more impressive people, when they come, you know, they are not really used to being told, thanks a lot for coming, here's a toilet, go and wash your hands. But this is what happened in the Queen's kingdom. And of course I had to follow the order as well. And then I come home one day and do just as is expected. I wash my hands there, but it's a small one, this toilet, and it's where the water comes from is in the corner. And I don't really like the kind of liquid soap that much. I prefer the solid stuff. But the solid stuff we typically have there in this particular toilet is pretty small to start with. Typically, it's the kind of soaps that I have stolen from various hotels around the world. So it's pretty small to start with. So in this instance, I come home, I wash my hands, I get out from the visitor's toilet, and after a while, the special lady goes to the same toilet, only to return with a towel, the MIRAMAX towel there is. So she has this MIRAMAX towel, and she says, Esa, do you notice anything special about this MIRAMAX towel? And I said, well, now that I sharpen my eyes to the utmost, I think I can sort of see some dirt there. Do you have any explanation for the dirt on the towel? I said, well, you know how I like to use the solid stuff when washing my hands, you know, proper solid soap as opposed to the liquid soap. And the particular one that happened to be there happened to be pretty small. In fact, it's good that it came up because I was just about to go and fetch some bigger one there. And I noticed that there's a little Vincent Vega that has sneaked into our boulevard apartment and taken my form. I mean, this is one of the most famous points, conceptualizations of Western philosophy, Aristotle's analysis of the notion of cause. And you know, Aristotle, you can say, he's a pretty impressive character. His teacher, Plato, was an impressive character. Plato's teacher or inspirer, Socrates, was an impressive character. We are here talking about three pretty impressive characters. But Aristotle is your sort of scientist type. He's as the ultimate scholarly oriented person who wants to find out things. Doing tremendously systematic work, observing how things actually are, but also conceptually, looking at ways to group things together so that you could perhaps convey some of the insights regarding the structure of things. And you could say, well, one fairly natural way to try to shed conceptual light on is the theme of cause. Why did something happen? I mean, why did Marvin's face go around the car? And why did the towel become dirty? And what Aristotle points out is the fact that what you can mean by a cause is highly ambitious. Ambiguous. It can mean what's the material used. You know, this soap is different from that soap, so it causes different effects. It's a liquid soap, solid soap. So a material can be a cause. Or it could be that the structure of the situation is the cause, or structure of the something is the cause. Or it could be that something brought about the effect. In principle, we could say, well, if somebody triggers with his finger a gun, in some sense, this person is the cause for whatever happened afterwards. But not necessarily so from the point of view of the person who actually did it. Because it could be that he or she focuses so strongly on what Aristotle called the teleological explanation, the teleological cause, where things are intended to go. So you can look at goals. You ask, why is somebody in this room? Somebody in this room could be in this room because of the fact that he or she wants to have 2 credit points which one can have by coming, for instance, today to this course. So there could be an outcome that you want to build up with your actions. But if the actual outcome is so different from what you actually intended, it could be that you shy away from the potential explanation for the cause, even if from an outsider's point of view, it's obvious you're a part of it. So you could say that it's this principle of taking full advantage of the ambiguity of the concept of cause. That is one key aspect in Vincent Vega's approach, because it's easier to blame somebody when you can sort of look for the notion of cause from different directions in any given case. Remember that people go happily with simple causal explanations anyway. Not looking for more complex systemic understanding of whatever the case is. In particular, this would be one way to put it. In particular, don't look into, let's say, Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline, that being one of the best demonstrations, written in a very accessible way, about systems thinking in the context of human life, in particular in the context of organizational life. But the idea there, of course, is one that is so obvious when you think about it, the fact that whatever happens, happens in the context of something else. But therefore, the something else is in some sense part of why whatever happened. But when something happens in the context of something else, the something else could be something in the future, because it could be that we are anticipating to something. And therefore, because we are anticipating to something that actually doesn't exist, but could exist, becomes part of whatever happens. So there are these kind of aspects in systems thinking that when you think about it, they're extremely sort of trivial. But you don't have to think about it. I mean, you can sort of be content when somebody says, let's build a wall. This will solve our problems. So remember that many people go happily with simple causal explanations is a key point in Vincent Vega's thinking. Take advantage of the accessibility bias. This is something that researchers have paid considerable attention to. I'm there mentioning Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. I'll come back to Kahneman later on. He's such a great writer also, Kahneman. Nobel laureate for economics, although he's a psychologist. But the key point here is that if something comes to your mind easily, it must be true. It's a possible principle to follow. So for instance, if it's the case that somebody's head has been blown around the car, you have the gun in your hand that just did it, but given the fact that your mind immediately yields you the observation, I didn't mean to shoot Marvin in the face, but there's something also accessible. You know, this is somewhat a rough road we are riding on. In fact, it could be that just at that moment, the car does hit a bump. So it comes so readily, this explanation, that maybe you hit the bump or something. So if something comes to mind easily, it must be true. It's a possible philosophy. In fact, this is where I would say that one of the reasons why the United States elected tens of thousands of millions millions of people, tens of millions of people, voted how they voted. Find reasons to become irritated. This is great for somebody who is looking for somebody else to blame. Because if you are irritated, the chances of your creative machinery finding somebody else or something else to blame is increased. So you are using terminology from our first lecture. You're inspired by the downscale register as opposed to the upscale register. Mandela being an example of somebody who is inspired by the upscale register. But of course you can be inspired by the downscale register. So for instance, you can be very, very sensitive to, let's say, orders or anything that resembles an order. So if somebody tries to suggest something to you, you can take that as an order, and you can take the delivery of an order as barking an order. And that gives an excellent possibility for you to feed your imagination when finding somebody else to blame for whatever has happened. Deny miracles. Downplay awe. And don't read stuff that relates to the highly improbable in history. One of the things I would like to be a result of this little lecture series of 4 lectures. It's just 4 lectures. It's not really that much. Would be people participating in this course to become interested in studying books. Now, notice that studying books is different from, for instance, reading a book in order to go to an examination. You can study a book by reading the book for, let's say, 10 pages. And you can sort of go into something that clearly somebody has pretty comprehensively composed. So somebody has put a lot of effort into this little thing, which is a book. So I can guarantee that if you go to Taleb's book, The Black Swan, and read the first 10 pages, your thinking will start to move. I'm not saying that it should go to a particular direction. I'm not saying it will go to a particular direction. I'm just making a prediction, which I believe is true. Your thinking starts to move because of the fact that we don't really think about the improbable. Because we don't really look for things that might be there, and if they would be there, might trigger something astonishing. Well, we just saw from the little posting from our UApp application, from our campfire, somebody who had met somebody in the middle of the street. And looking back to that experience, the person found something interesting there, something that enriches him or her as he or she goes back there. And this is, the kind of logic that, of course, given the fact that we have people from such diverse backgrounds in this room, you could say could happen here. That something highly improbable would start right during this next break. Because you go to a coffee machine there, maybe go to a toilet, maybe stand outside a toilet waiting to get in, but there's somebody else. And you start to sort of chat with the person, but you start to chat with the person with respect to a particular history of having participated right here. So maybe you are a bit more open to the possibility of a black swan. Something that is highly unlikely to happen. You don't really run into interesting people that change your life forever all the time. It's very seldom it happens, but sometimes it does happen. It's a fact. But Vincent Vega principle says, deny miracles. If somebody says, hey, we are in a small country, Finland is 5.5 million people now. But during the war, Finland was just 4 million people. What's the likelihood of that kind of country staying independent? When being attacked by a superpower. And when has that happened? In history. You can ask, what was the reaction at Motorola's head office when news started to come in regarding some challenger from some country most members of Motorola's board hadn't heard of. Maybe somebody pointed out, let's say, the year 1995, 1996, that I was told that that country, Finland, where this company Nokia comes from, has only 15 million people. I mean, they don't have a chance. Their home market is so ridiculously small. It's a possible way to think that you deny the possibility of something highly improbable from happening. But of course, the fact is that highly improbable things have happened. And if you think about back your own experience, I'm pretty confident that the kind of things come to your mind, like if you live in a relationship, whatever the relationship is like, and sometimes a relationship is great. It was so close, it never happened. And if I think about my own experience that I related last time, the murder attempt, there were so many parameters there where it was so close that I wouldn't be here. So Vincent Vega principle number 5 is deny miracles. Don't, as it were, open your mind to this kind of astonishing things as a possibility. So as a result of having just escaped a guy who unloaded his gun from 2 meters, in principle he should have been able to hit both of us, but at least one of us, but he didn't. It's just, it's freaky, but it happens. Focus on the hedonistic surface delights in life. Remember, this is also part of us as human beings. We sort of take delight in eating the ice cream. We sort of take delight in sort of small things of life. Our body functions in such a way that it can convey delight to us. So positivities can emerge out from very little. And nothing wrong with that. That's part of us. It's great to drink a great latte. Every time I come here to Design Factory, I start to think about a great Design Factory latte. They have a great latte machine there. So it sort of delights me to drink the latte. And if you think about Vincent Vega, there are 2 particularly important episodes in the entire film that bear on Vincent Vega. The first important event is where the film itself starts and where it in fact ends, which is this cafeteria that is being robbed by a gangster couple. But the gangster couple, they are amateurs in comparison to Jules and Vincent, who are experienced professionals. So you can say, well, this is a very important episode. The episode the film itself starts with and ends up with. And what is Vincent Vega doing? During this episode, well, he is in the toilet. He is taking a shit in the toilet. Now, of course, you can say, well, a person taking a shit, it's sort of understandable if the person takes delight in taking a shit. Sometimes, you have to look for the toilet, and then you finally get to the toilet, it's such a relief to shit. But this is not Vincent Vega approach. Vincent Vega approach is to sort of take delight if you have a chance to take a shit. So he's sitting there, And this is possible, for somebody to sort of focus upon this kind of surface delights. And another episode that is so important for the character Vincent Vega in the film, as I said, the film itself doesn't linearly follow the path of time in the time the film depicts. So Vincent Vega is in the first episode and also in the last episode. But in between, in fact, he dies. And the way he dies is he goes after a boxer who has betrayed Marcellus the boss. So he goes to the home of the boxer and waits there to kill him because the boxer has betrayed Marcellus the boss. Now, meanwhile, the boxer played in the film by Bruce Willis learns that his clock, that is the only memory of his late father he has been forgotten to the flat by the boxer's girlfriend, although he specifically asked for her to pick it up, but she forgot to do so. So he decides to go back in order to fetch the clock. So he comes cautiously to the flat, doesn't see there's anybody there, finds the clock, everything goes fine. But then all of a sudden he finds a shotgun. He's surprised to find a shotgun. What's this? And as he finds a shotgun, he also hears the toilet being flushed. It's Vincent Vega taking a shit. And not, just sort of quickly handling the case, but really, taking delight. And as he walks out from the toilet, Bruce Willis, the boxer character who has now his Vincent Vega's shotgun, shoots him dead. I mean, the fact is that there are so many ways we can delight ourselves, made possible by our culture. You can go into all kinds of virtual realities, you can go into all kinds of materials that cause physiologically you to feel good, and this is basically Vincent Vega principle. Don't go into more complex positive experiences. For instance, of the kind that Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who is the tremendous researcher and writer, thinker, who came up with the flow concept in what many people consider his opus magnum, the evolving self, develops this theme of us being able to experience as positive something that is highly complex. But the fact that it's highly complex means that you might not be able to experience that easily. It could be that you have to go through periods when you don't feel really that great. But this is not the Vincent Vega philosophy. The Vincent Vega philosophy is to focus on the hedonistic surface delights in life. Don't engage in reflection, but stay with the surface and the sort of Le Big Mac discourse. And the Le Big Mac discourse refers to his trip to Europe, during which he experienced this and that. And there's so much you can cover with Le Big Mac discourse, all kinds of surface phenomena. Our culture is rich in generating this kind of possibilities for surface discourse. But what it means is that you don't go deeper. You don't go into the area where you would sort of examine things at the deeper level. You continue with what has been called since ancient times the unexamined life. I mentioned Aristotle and Aristotle's analysis of cause. He has all kinds of, I think, important conceptualizations that we use daily, Aristotle. Something being potential as opposed to actual. But although it's not actual, something that is potential only, it's in some sense still something existent. But the idea of an unexamined life as something not worth living, I would say this is the shortest possible course item of a history of philosophy class. This is from the web. So I just searched using the words unexamined life Socrates. And out comes this short description of what the idea is, but the idea there is one where you observe that the human being is such a creature that he or she doesn't necessarily have to examine his or her life. And of course, the more there are possibilities for that, the easier it is to do. Now, of course, you could say, well, isn't life itself, isn't world itself so astonishing that you can't continue unexamine it? How could it be possible that anybody can sort of go through life as something not worth examining more into? You could say, well, of course, in the old days, each of us, let's say at the age of 3, at the age of 4, at the age of 5, maybe even at the age of 7, was very excited of the idea of examining life. You see a stone, you're excited about the stone. And there are all kinds of, you see water coming, great. It's astonishing how excited we were at the age of, let's say, 5, to examine life. But some people later on pull themselves back from such an orientation and embrace with enthusiasm the idea of an unexamined life. This is what Vincent Vega is doing, and he's a charming guy. Somebody can be charming while at the same time engaging a life that you could say perhaps the most grand tradition, the spiritual tradition of Western thinking, maybe the same in Eastern thinking as well, but I know better the Western way of thinking in terms of this particular idea of coming to the conclusion the unexamined life is not worth living. This is Socrates' position. But it's not a necessary position. Now think about this from a slightly different angle. And excuse me for the material there is now on the slide, quite a lot of it, but I mentioned Daniel Kahneman in context of the accessibility bias. He came out with a book, Thinking Fast and Slow, a few years ago, in which he puts together his work with Amos Tversky, who had passed away already, and the work of quite a number of other researchers on the theme of human thinking regarding how it can be biased. Now, one reason why human thinking could be tremendously biased is because it could be that the fact that it is biased be of tremendous use in a number of situations. Because a number of situations are such that you don't have time to examine it in more detail. Should that be the case, then it's good to sort of automatically be able to think functionally right, given the situation. So this is system 1 in you. It's something that is effortless. Because it could be that the situation, for instance, when somebody attacks you, is one where you just need to think and act fast. So it's this rapidness that is absolutely fundamental. It's this able to be reactive. It's good if you are automatic in what you do. It really is amazing to me when I reflect back to the stabbing episode experience, as an experience, to observe that I don't think I felt there were any kind of options there at all, at any moment. I somehow felt that everything I did was just the only thing to do. And for instance, when I blocked the second hit with that briefcase, I sort of remember it vaguely in terms of the movement. So it clearly wasn't a situation where I would have first had examined the situation investigated various options and then come to the conclusion the best option is to block the way of the heat that is coming with that briefcase. It's just that it was somehow reactively, automatically, without any effort really in terms of what happened, the right thing in that situation, functionally speaking, to do. And it somehow came out of me. And I didn't search my memory. What do I know of potential knife attacks? And similarly for Jaakko's behaviors on that occasion. Jaakko also, by the way, when we went down with the attacker, shouted. There were a couple of students further down. So Jaakko shouted quite loudly, "Hey, come to help us to take away the knife." Now, notice this is different from saying, for instance, "Hey, come to help us." The likelihood of you reacting automatically in a particular kind of way that in this case is needed is increased if the line is, "Hey, come to help us to take away the knife," than if you just say, "Hey, come to help us," without any clarification regarding the help. So system 1 typical features, system 2 typical features are quite different. This is something that we have touched upon as the chief interest of our lectures here and of the space we here try to create, and also of the UApp campfire application that we have created. We hope to create room for your system 2 to work. But the difficulty is your system 2 don't necessarily work. And this is because it requires effort. But at any given time, you have other things to attend. So it seems to me that most people that were here during the first lecture are here again, and that's to me very inspiring. But given the fact that the first lecture was on Friday and this is Monday, and given the fact that people have all kinds of other things to do any given Monday, and given the fact that we have 2 more lectures to go, and also the fact that this lecture, like all of the lectures, is going to be on video, it's understandable if somebody doesn't come. And in fact, some people haven't come. And this is not a criticism, I'm just sort of observing that it's not likely to be a result of careful reflection. It's much likely to be a reaction to something. For instance, it seems to be raining heavily. And I repeat, this is not any kind of criticism. I'm just sort of wanting to bring our attention to what actually happens in our thinking, because much of what happens in our thinking without being aware of it. And therefore, it's highly likely that something happens that wouldn't have happened had you given more careful thought to it. This is the possibility that you have with your system 2, to give more thought to whatever the something is. But that requires your effort. That requires certain distancing. It can't be just a reaction. So this is, you could say, a great human possibility. Indeed, we don't know any other species that would have this possibility. So in this sense, this is something that you could say is distinctly human. It also permits hypothetical thinking. Hypothetical thinking means, had I not been there, what might have happened? If I continue this kind of behavior, what's likely to happen? This is hypothetical thinking. It hasn't yet happened. It's just a potentiality that they're talking about. So it's really a great resource to have system 2 in Kahneman's terms. It's also something where you can build up rules. Because it could be that you realize the fact that, well, I want to have more complex delights in life than just the hedonistic, body-related delights. But I realize that that's going to happen only if I put myself into long enough processes that might involve negative stages. So you form a rule just to continue even when you don't feel that great is a possibility that you can come up from your system 2 that might then intervene with your system 1. And gradually it could be that your system 1 also starts to act differently. But the problem there is it might not happen that quickly. You know, you go to a coaching session, you go to a lecture that delivers some important content and you are very focused during the lecture, let's assume. Let's assume that coaching session you go to is very, very efficient. The result is that something that happens in your life is likely to be different more or less automatically. You automatically now remember to something because you have learned it so well or you have been taught so effectively to something. But when it comes to, and now I say this quite consciously, but when it comes to living your life, as opposed to just having a particular skill, having, as it were, particular reaction sets, particular reaction patterns in place for a particular domain of potential human events. I mean, living a life, it's vastly more complex. It's just likely that anybody can have. Anything remotely covering all the cases, it would seem like a much better idea to set oneself going in the reflective dimension permanently. Now, setting oneself in the reflective mode permanently for somebody might remind of a theme we discussed in the Mandela case during the first lecture. Remember, one of the points there was this point of going back to the fundamentals. Tell me, Francois, what is your philosophy on leadership? Is a question somebody can pose. And then, as I said, you know, quite, I think, remarkable people, in this case, business people like Risto Siilasmaa is the one I mentioned, do this regularly. I know of quite a number of other people, going back to the fundamentals. But that means activating your reflective muscles. But the reflective muscles face challenges. One of them is that your system 1, the automatic side of your thinking, creates such subjectively convincing truths. They don't really seem like worthy of any kind of challenge. And it really is amazing. The fact that it seems true means that it must be true, is what System 1 is delivering. And it's the other side of the coin that I mentioned in positive terms regarding the stabbing episode. I said, looking back, I don't really remember any kind of options there at all. But in many cases, of course, that kind of an approach where you don't see any options leads to bad results. You can think about a quarrel you had with your loved one, with your brother, with your parents, you know, a quarrel. During a quarrel, one's system 1 is typically quite active. As it's active, it delivers truths that from your point of view are not only evident, they are self-evident, they are so clearly evident. So even if the other one says, hey, you didn't say so and so, from your point of view, that's outrageous even to suggest you didn't say so and so. System 1 is biased, that's its strength. But the fact that something has strength doesn't mean that it has in all contexts the relevant strength. System 1 prefers simple cause-effect explanations. And the simple cause-effect explanations are great because that, of course, means that you can sort of focus on just one thing. And it really is amazing, this, you know, crooked Hillary. You know, can we choose somebody like that to be president of the United States? Somebody who is crooked. System 1 prefers simple cause-effect explanations. System 2 is lazy. This is the problem. That I think social media accelerates. Because social media, as a rule, doesn't activate, encourage the use of laborious, effortful reflection. It encourages for things to be instantaneous. So if a professor suggests, I would really appreciate it, I would really be happy if somebody taking this class 5 years from now would come back to me and said, Professor Saarinen, I'm so grateful for the point you made for reading books. You can say, how could this be sensational? It can only be sensational if the orientation towards reflection, the orientation towards something that takes time, is laborious, is effort intensive, isn't in the air. Our apparent contexts are such that they sort of lead us elsewhere. But that's easy because system 2 is lazy. You don't have to ask, for instance, what would follow if such and such actually would be put in practice? I mean, you don't have to sort of go into a theme deeper. Your relative success is so far in most situations, which is a fact. You've been in most situations successful. To some extent. Your feeling of having executed pretty well. Of course, you could have executed even better, but the fact is you've executed pretty well. You might have proven algorithmic capabilities. So it could be that you are enlisted in a program that is difficult to get enlisted into. In order to get enlisted, you need to demonstrate your abilities in some kind of algorithmic behavior. You have capacities in that, whatever it is, something. Do not prove your freely reflective system to muscles have been developed that much. Now, at the same time, your system 2, as a result, could be tremendously underused. But you don't feel this. And the reason why you don't feel this is because on the one hand, you know, you feel pretty good about things. Also, your feeling is that you push yourself pretty much in order to get this or that done. So the execution mode is one that easily gives us the impression that we are really sort of demanding a lot of ourselves. We are really pushing ourselves almost to the limit. Because no matter what the execution context is, of course, the criteria of success for the execution context are such that we typically fall short. And therefore, our feeling is that, you know, we should do even more. But the internal feeling of we should do even more doesn't mean that we feel inclined to do more reflection. So the result is your system 2 could be tremendously underused and you wouldn't know. This is exactly the situation of Vincent Vega. He doesn't know the fact that he uses his reflection muscles so little. You know, even when his good friend, you know, there are few people he loves, respects, like he loves and respects Jules. So if Jules has come to some new thoughts, you would expect him, Vincent, to be interested. Hey, tell me more about that. And as opposed to starting to argue against it. But he doesn't even then want to reflect. I mean, it's also, I would assume, things like your personality, your style, the true you, that are the kind of constructs that help you to stay with your current system one, that is with your automatic responses, because you're a little bit easily irritated, for instance. It's part of your personality. I mean, you're not the kind of type that would sort of start to read Tolstoy's War and Peace. So I mean, it's good sort of in theory to know important books or tremendous presentations of, let's say, systems thinking, applied systems thinking, or the role of the improbable in history. But you're studying marketing, so therefore you need to, as it were, you're studying computer science. It's you're in the architecture. So you need to devote your reflection muscles to be targeted to a fairly narrowly defined domain, and you're content with that. But the option is this other idea of ancient philosophy. I would say this is as famous as the idea of the unexamined life not being worth living. This idea of knowing thyself. But the problem of knowing thyself as a maxim is catchy, because it's so easy to sort of believe that you roughly know already yourself. And the reason why you might think on a system one level that you roughly know basic features of yourself is because you've been watching yourself. So the internal picture seems pretty accurate. So I mean, who knows you better than you know? Because you've been to all the situations. But the know thyself principle, I would say, starts with preparing for something huge. Don't believe you know what the huge is. It's you could say, okay, if I prepare for something huge, if I manage not to believe what it is, what might be the first steps? Well, one step would be at least to ask somebody else. What do you think happened? And I mean, you could sort of reach out to the world as opposed to just stay with yourself. And this is a paradox. Because it's sort of a paradox to reach outwards if the point is to know oneself as from inside. So the possibility that I hope as a kind of pulp wisdom to emerge from this lecture is this intention, this orientation towards knowing thyself by reaching out to others, by reaching out to the world, by giving up some such assumptions that we easily have regarding we pretty well already know what or who we are. That there is this well-defined me already in existence. So that's the first part of our Pulp Wisdom lecture. Let me stop there and let me now suggest let's take a few minutes before we take a break, and hopefully create here a possibility to move our thoughts a bit further with the help of other people in this room. So please form a group of let's say 3 people and exchange some of your impressions, some of your thoughts on the lecture so far with those people for some 5 minutes or so, 5-7 minutes, and then let's have a break. I think we have also coffee and tea there, and in fact you could stand up and pick up some if you want. But then let's have after that 5-7 minutes, let's have a break, and then I continue in 20 minutes from that. But thanks a lot for your attention so far. Let's now have a little discussion. Thank you. You know, one of the kind of agony for me creating aspects of a lecture is because I don't want to intrude. I don't want to sort of push in. Now, at the same time, I want the situation at the same time as me not coming, as it were, after anybody, or as it were, intervening into anybody's mental, emotional processes. I still want to be interesting. Now, and this of course means that if you want to be interesting, you want to be interesting from the point of view of anybody who is there. So what I try to do is that I somehow try to sense if I'm being interesting from the point of view of everybody. And that means each person. But of course, to some extent, the feeling I might have, yes, now people find this interesting, could also signal that, you know, somebody might think I'm pushing the case a bit aggressively, or I'm, as it were, trying to argue somebody over from position X to position Y to position Y. But that's not what I try to do. But the time limitation creates this kind of pressure that doesn't really fully serve the real purpose. And the real purpose is for us to create together a space for personally relevant reflection. If your reflection is personally relevant, that means that it's going to have significance from the point of view of the actual conduct of your actual life. And of course, some parts of the actual conduct of your actual life relate to high-profile activities where you are tested, where you are executing something, but some other aspects of your life might not be that high profile. They might relate to the kind of events that take place on a Tuesday with to somebody you share the flat with, or somebody you happen to meet in the corridor as you leave the flat, or your sister with whom your relationship isn't that great for whatever reason. So it's like the mundane aspects of our lives that I'd like our thinking to become enriched through the processes that we would generate here, and that would then help us with a similar aim in the future, because of course it doesn't go away. We are all our lives. We are in a situation where various mundane aspects, various everyday aspects of our lives could be more enriching to ourselves, to people we share those moments with, to whatever we try to do with our lives. And it's to that effect, this idea of coming to realize what we are as force fields of very peculiar kind. For instance, force fields that seem to have, when it comes to thinking, two types of systems that don't really appear to the subject himself, herself, as distinct, because your thoughts, of course, are just the same thoughts all the time from your point of view. Basically, they come across as some kind of de facto representations of what actually is the case. So that means that even to the extent that you would come to realize that, well, there probably is some kind of coloring involved, there's maybe some kind of bias involved, maybe there are alternatives I just haven't thought about, kind of thoughts, are the ones we'd like to become activated as a muscle within you as we go on. But your advocacy mode, as opposed to your inquiry mode, is vastly more dominant than you often believe is the case. So most of the time you, as it were, claim something. So you might, for instance, claim in your mind that Esa seems to claim that he doesn't want to make an intrusive intervention into my thinking, but in fact he is making an intrusive intervention. He's just doing it in but a kind of polite way or whatever it is. So I mean, our minds are tuned to sort of suspecting that something fishy is going on. And of course you want to be cautious to whatever fishy is going on. It's for this reason why I believe it's so important to create campfires, to create a kind of local contexts of trust. So that you could, at least those people that you are there with at the campfire, trust. So that you wouldn't have to lose your energies to thinking, is there something fishy going on in the whatever somebody is saying? So somebody seems to be such sharing an experience, but is there something, am I being sort of being dragged into something I don't really want to endorse? Is the as the counter dimension to the kind of dimension as a space I like to see us to step into. Now, think about this from the following point of view. This is an impressive person I had the honor of coming to know some years back. I think it was it 2007, 2008 maybe, so it's already 10 years. I came to know Professor Phelps in connection of a wedding of the son of a mutual friend of ours. And how I came to know him was, I was sitting there and as the ceremony took place, and I saw this elderly couple that seemed to be in their 70s maybe. So there's this elderly couple, but they clearly had magic in their relationship. So I said to the person next to me, I said, do you know who this couple is? And the person next to me said, yeah, that's Professor Edmund Phelps and his Argentinian wife, Viviana. He's the 2006 Nobel laureate in economics. And after the ceremony, I went to talk with them, first introducing myself, but then saying, excuse me, but from my point of view, it seems to me that you have magic in your relationship, so what's the secret of your love? I asked them, and they got very excited of this question, and we started to talk. So they very kindly invited me to come to their table, and it was a beautiful, beautiful evening. And led later on to Professor Phelps kindly asked me to join as a foreign member his center at Columbia University in New York. But one of the striking points he once made when I asked, what do you think is your main contribution to economics? He said, well, I think a lot of people would say that I've tried to bring people back to economic theorizing. Now, an outsider would, in a sense, be a little bit surprised by the fact that people were not at the center of economic theorizing in the first place. So I mean, how could it be that people have disappeared from, let's say, organizational thinking? I mean, how could it be that you have theories of management, you have these practices of leadership, all kinds of things going on that in fact seem to be fairly distanced from people? Is the kind of phenomenon that I think we need to face head on, this kind of overexcitement about maps, as opposed to the territories the maps are supposed to represent. Notice that in human life this can easily happen. that you develop some form of representation, but the form of representation is something tangible. The fact that it's tangible means that it can be, for instance, discussed, it can be passed over, it can be debated, there's some objective truth about it. So to the extent that we are excited about objective truth, which is of course something that all of us are excited about, objective truth, might result us in becoming a bit overexcited about just the representation and just about so-called objective truth. Because subjective truth is also true. And in a very significant way to somebody, like just during the break I looked into our digital platform and somebody had posted quite an impressive experience there. Really quite something. And of course something you could say specific to this person. I mean, your experiences are specific to you. You know, it's you could say, well, shouldn't we be interested in our specific experiences from the point of view of using those experiences as a springboard to living more fulfilling lives in the future? And what might be some of the techniques we might use to that effect? You could say, well, wouldn't one technique seem to be like, first of all, remembering that there is such a phenomenon as opposed to just representations of the phenomenon as life. Phenomenon of life. That's different from having representations of life. I mean, you can have respected professors of economics that apparently, you know, have in many ways demonstrated their tremendous skills and constantly are really struggling to push something forward. But when it comes to people actually as subjects of economic decision-making and economic activities maybe are not that relevant from the point of view of this professor, is okay to some extent. But you could say, if that goes too far, you know, that's not good news. I mean, if we don't keep the fundamentals somehow within a touching distance, we are going to be in trouble. And the fact is, we seem to be in trouble. Because it seems that huge things can happen in the realm of economics, the real economy, and nobody knew about it before it happened. It's a total black swan. And notice that if people would have known about it, surely some people would have taken advantage of the fact it's going to happen. There's a huge interest involved, but that's not the case. So you could say staying in touch with the phenomenon of yourself, the phenomenon of yourself, would be just sort of minimal conclusion. The phenomenon of yourself has had, for instance, some experiences. The phenomenon of yourself consists also of observing, hey, I've had experience, and now as I go back to it, I observe that actually there was this and that is now particularly relevant. Because the phenomenon of myself continues. And in this particular instance, something that I didn't really pay attention to originally actually seems important. So it makes me re-evaluate the present moment, and not only the present moment, but also some previous events. Is the world in which I like to explore with to me, very powerful scene. Actually, it's a sequence. I think maybe 3 scenes, 2 or 3 scenes from the film Kill Bill, another Tarantino's powerful film. Of course, like in Pulp Fiction and in general with Tarantino, he likes to sort of draw humor of a kind from violence, and he exaggerates things. That's his form of humor. Also, he's very verbal, and typically his characters speak much more verbally than in fact would be the case amongst the kind of people he's describing there. But it's credible in the context of the film. So we'll go to the end of the film, Kill Bill. Of course, it's in two parts. It's a huge thing. And what it seems like is like a tremendous sequence of acts of vengeance. Because the person who has different names there, Beatrice Kiddo is one name, The Bride is another name, Black Mamba is a third name, played by Uma Thurman, is killing people. And the reason why she's killing people is because these people killed the people that were gathered in a church in which she was about to get married, commissioned by and also attended by her former lover, Bill, and who is this kind of charismatic, charming kind of criminal leader who has these assassins, one of whom used to be Black Mamba, i.e. The Bride, i.e. Beatrice Kiddo. So they come to the church, Bill and his gang, and kill everybody, and almost kill also the character played by Uma Thurman. But in fact, she isn't killed, but goes to coma, and delivers a child. The child is taken away, but then she returns. And most of the film is about her return and her going after the various people that were in the church. So it seems like a modern day Count of Monte Cristo, the great story of revenge, of vengeance. But I think it's much more than that. And this is brought to bear at the end, where Kiddo finally meets Bill. So they are former lovers. They have a child together, and she wants to talk. You know, without going into stereotypical overall claims, the overall fact is, also on the basis of research, although there are always individual differences, or individual cases in marriages, the overall situation is one where the woman wants to talk. In many cases, the guy is not that eager to talk. And of course, there are exceptions, but this is sort of a side aspect of the situation. She wants to sort of inquire into what was on your mind, which you could say is a fair question. So let's go into this episode. It's going to be somewhat longer, this clip, than any of the other ones we have used or will use. But I'm going to go into the clip quite thoroughly once we have experienced it. So now let's just go in there. So there is Bill. Okay, I'll stop it there. Now let's look into this, I think, powerful scene from the point of view of the key lessons. Notice first of all that Bill there is, as it were, setting for the record, for instance, the point that letting somebody think somebody they love is dead when they're not is quite cruel. So he's setting himself as a victim. Also getting emotional when going back to that situation of realizing how badly he has been treated. So setting yourself as a victim, point number one. Point number two is, to the extent that he admits that there is something that could have gone better. This is the furthest he comes. I overreacted. So he's dismissing the significance of the event from the point of view of the other one entirely, while technically admitting it did happen. So the key point is, if there is emotion involved when he's looking into his own victimhood, which was point number one. In point number two, there's no demonstration of empathy. So 0 degree of empathy. So you just technically admit that, yeah, perhaps I overreacted. Then he comes up with this point that I'm a murdering bastard. And there are consequences to breaking the heart of a murdering bastard. So he's fixing himself to an essence. The essence being himself as a murdering bastard. And given the fact that this is what he presents himself essentially to be, he doesn't have any choice. It's almost like the essence itself carries over to individual actions. So given that this is the case, also he here gets emotional. It's yet another form of feeling a victim. Was my reaction really that surprising? I mean, given the fact that his essence is what it is it really surprising that he acted exactly as he did? I think we have, all of us experienced this in some context where from our point of view, the other one should have known that if he or she does whatever he or she did when we are in such and such and such and such and such a situation, they should have known that, you know, I can overreact a little bit. You know, you should know that when I have worked so hard, when, you know, things have gone wrong, and when it's raining, you know, when I'm hungry, you should know that I can overreact. So my overreaction, in fact, is his or her fault. Because, of course, technically speaking, and here, of course, there is the tone of Vincent Vega playing in the symphony again. Of course, the fact is that the other one did contribute to whatever happened. And because it's a whole we share, so it's obvious that in some sense the other one is also a cause. So was my reaction really that surprising? So pushing responsibility of one's action to the shoulders of the other one. And then we come to the final encounter, when after the exchange they have had made it clear that Bill is not going to inquire into my position, Kiddo's position. So he comes to the conclusion, she comes to the conclusion, you and I have unfinished business. Now, as this episode starts, as a kind of sub-episode within that whole we saw, Bill tries to overcome Kiddo by surprise. In a sense, you could say this is not a very manly thing to do, but he's not a man of integrity anyway. This is a murdering bastard. Okay, so he tries to take Kiddo by surprise, but he doesn't succeed. And then Kiddo applies the 5-point palm exploding heart technique that the supermaster Pai Mei had taught her, but he didn't know had been taught to her. So he tries to take her by surprise but doesn't succeed, and she has this particular hit there in hiding. And then he realizes he is going to die, because he knows what the 5-point palm exploding heart technique is. He's going to die in 30 seconds or whatever the period is. So, but even when defeated and realizing he's going to die, Bill doesn't get beyond himself. Shows no regret, no respect for Kiddo's reasons for doing what she did, or is doing. So you know, I think you can look forward to Donald Trump doing this when he goes down. Not showing any regret about anything. It's sorry, the text is here rather small, but I think it's interesting to observe what it is when it ends up with this observation that when she doesn't really boast of the fact that yes, she's one of the few people in the world who can do the 5-point palm exploding technique hits. But he doesn't take pride in it. She doesn't take pride in it. And she's sort of excusing to some extent, yeah, this is the case. Why didn't you tell me? I don't know. Maybe I'm a bad person. No, you're not a bad person. You're a terrific person. You're my favorite person. Again, focus upon him. But every once in a while, you can be a real cunt. Instead of saying, and indeed, once in a while, you can be really tremendous. I mean, nobody is like you. But that would be to respect what she is, the way he's incapable of doing. And leaving the scene then, his final line is, how do I look? So no farewell, no reaching out to the woman he has loved. He distances himself as far as he can. So to the extent he's sitting there, he's just sort of holding onto the chair. So when she touches his hand, even then he doesn't react back, even with the hand. He's sort of seeking isolated grandeur, which is possible. And Kiddo, on the contrary, says, first, you look ready, which is sort of like, I think, a beautiful statement there. You look ready. Whatever it is, you look ready. Sort of reassuring. No dismissing for him. You got exactly what you deserve, for instance. Would have been a possible line. And there's loving kindness in her eyes. You know, we used to be lovers. There was so much that was good. No sort of joy for victory, for revenge. You look ready, reassuringly. And in the entire film, as opposed to how do I look, before the distance in a way with the isolated grandeur, like Bill does, her final line is, thank you, in the toilet. Thank you. Gratitude, in words and in emotion. It's sort of an upscale register that is dominant even when in tears. You know, it was so close. There was so much beautiful. You know, this is life. You know, I've got a daughter. You know, there's so much I can be happy for. So gratefulness. And I think what this brings home is the contrast that you see in various forms in all the great spiritual traditions, all great philosophical traditions of mankind, which is this contrast between intrinsic values, something being valuable per se, and something being instrumentally valuable. You know, something being valuable in order to get such and such, for instance, done. And what I think the film does is it demonstrates somebody drawing the line. Here is the line. I don't want to give birth to a child, to the world I'm sharing with Bill. There's a line. And she tries to escape. She finds somebody, thinks, okay, maybe we could fit together as father and mother for the child that was in fact fathered by Bill. But as they try to get married, he comes with his gang and kills everybody, and almost kills her. So there was already a drawing of the line. But the intrinsic values she has was never an interesting theme, even intellectually, for Bill. And then after she tries to understand him, as opposed to him trying to understand her. So after trying to understand him, she realizes, it's not going anywhere. He just doesn't get out of himself. So here is the line. So I think this is the situation. Sorry that I say this way. I think this is the case right now with the number of honorable men and women in the United States. But a lot of people so far haven't drawn the line. But it's possible for a human being to draw a line. And similar, it's possible for a human being, and now I come back to what we discussed in the first part. The following, one sort of funny feature. Initially, when I saw the film, I was a little bit perplexed by it, and didn't really know what to make of it. Is the way Tarantino in Pulp Fiction. Is the way Tarantino in Pulp Fiction sort of plays the Old Testament. Because Jules quotes Ezekiel. Well, in fact, it sounds right. In fact, it's not exactly right. But it's right to the extent of making it clear that you can, as it were, pick up a classic and make your version of it, your cover of it. This is, of course, for musicians possible. And I myself, well, I don't play any instruments, so it's a big regret for me not to be able to do, as it were, my own versions of classics musically. But then again, in some sense, of course, actually, I think I am sort of a musician. And surely I could also pick up some classic theme and give, as it were, my cover version of that classic story. But and this in fact is what Tarantino is doing to some extent with Old Testament, when he makes Jules the guy whose transition we witnessed there. When he draws a line, and by drawing the line, that's it. That's enough for me. I'm telling myself today, I'm true. So he has all of a sudden realized that this kind of life isn't the kind of life I want to conduct. So making a choice, picking up, as it were, the path forward, realizing what are some of those things that are not worth sacrificing. Even if I would gain such and such and such and such in order to get so and so, sort of, even if there are all kinds of instrumental valuables I can access through Marcellus, I'm true. It's a possible line of thought. And that, of course, is something that if you think about the New Testament, which one way to think about the New Testament is to think about it as a pretty impressive collection of stories that have a generic content that just like you can say you look into a particular episode in a particular film and you pick up from that episode some generic insights to the way a life can be conducted. You could say, well, isn't the possible line of thought which is described in the New Testament the sort of overall point that somebody articulates, somebody even perhaps in concrete actions exemplifies love, or more generally loving kindness. But in fact what happens is that there are forces that for various reasons get agitated by this, with the result that the person is crucified. And you could say, well, isn't that in a sense pretty much what happened to Socrates in a different setting? Because Socrates' idea was to try to highlight to people that we should live better lives and we should challenge our thinking to that effect. But in fact, it ended up in him being sentenced to death. In his case, it wasn't crucifixion, it was drinking poison. But nonetheless, the effect was the same, and it was also gradual. So it wasn't necessarily the case that a lot of people wanted that in the first place. It's just that you took one step, and then second step, and third step, and so forth. So it gradually went into that. And if you look into Plato's text, Apology, that describes the final episode in Socrates' life, the way he talks about himself in front of the people that have been gathered there, as the custom is to judge the case against him. And then he is found guilty of the charges. But after he's found guilty of the charges, there's still a possibility to walk away relatively well, because you are allowed by Athenian law to suggest the punishment. So you could say, well, isn't that great possibility for Socrates to search such a punishment that it's sort of technically okay, but doesn't really mean anything? But instead of doing this, he suggests that in fact he should be paid. And which is so outrageous that even more people now want against him, and he's sentenced to death. But it sort of happens inadvertently. Probably there were not that many people that initially wanted it. So it's possible, that you get tracked into a group of people. You sort of hear about somebody, the guy is talking about love and so forth. You haven't really seen the guy, haven't sort of, what does he say? But you hear some people being agitated. And then you are thrown in a situation, he's brought to some balcony there from some ruler. And what has he done? But the people are there shouting. People can get excited when they are shouting something. Lock her up, lock her up. And whatever it is, it's people can get excited, you can get excited. I mean, it doesn't seem that big thing. You are there, other people are doing it anyway. But the result is that you have, in fact, crossed lines. And the problem there is you never thought about those lines. Had you thought about those lines? Had you reflected, where are the lines? Maybe you hadn't crossed them. I mean, think about it this way. And this is... this just to illustrate the point. When our boys were small, and as I said, we have twins. We just saw, Pips and me, a couple with twins. In the great cafe, Gudio, Manami has there the back from Gudio Cafe. It's such a great place in Katajanokka. We went there briefly. I met the owner. He's such a great entrepreneur, such a great guy with that pure chocolate idea of his. So we went there very briefly, but there was a couple with twins that were maybe 1 year and a half. And twins at that age are very, very hard from the point of view of the parents. And I was reminded of some of the times. I mean, it's such a blessing to get twins, but it's also a lot of work. It's sort of a burden. So I mean, your shitload is increased exponentially. Also, I mean, it's a big blessing, but this is just a fact that, you know, also from the point of view of the relationship, it really does take its toll. So when the boys were small, our boys, it's conceivable then things could have gone differently as compared to how they actually did go. I mean, at that time, in the early 90s, my career was picking up as a corporate speaker. I had been up until then pretty much a university guy, writing books, commenting Finnish culture and so forth. I was pretty famous already, but I was sort of like a public intellectual type. But now this increase in demand to give speeches, give lectures, seminars for companies grew exponentially in the 90s. And it was really great. It's in so many ways, it's also in terms of the income. So it's one dimension in life, you know, the instrumental values were quite considerable. I was very excited. And becoming excited, of course, means that you easily then go in that direction where you get that positive feedback, where the possibilities are. But that's in many ways in tension with what happens at home and what are the demands at home. So it would have been conceivable for me to start to feel about Pipsa the special lady, the mother of my twins. That actually, let's be realistic here. I mean, we've grown apart. I mean, she's not like she used to be. She's become so negative, let's face it. I mean, she doesn't respect the way I'm trying to struggle and bring bread to home with these demanding gigs I'm giving all over the world for Nokia and other companies. And you know, she's often criticizing me of, you know, the minute small stupid things. It's true that, you know, I'm not that good in many affairs here at home. But shouldn't she understand that, you know, I'm a speaker. You know, I'm sort of a star. You know, it's conceivable that during this period, this is hypothetical, but I think you can see it. You know, it's conceivable in those years when the boys were small. I would have become distanced from the special lady. I would have started to feel that, you know, maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all, these children. I mean, maybe everybody would benefit if we would, you know, live in two separate addresses, maybe close by, and so forth. And we could be friends. She's such a terrific person anyway. And I mean, it's sort of easy for a person to convince himself or herself of this kind of line of thought. So let's assume it would have been the case. And I'm, let's say, in Kokkola. This is in northern part of Finland, there on the coast, Kokkola, giving a lecture, but I can't fly back. It ends too late. And I'm checking in, let's say, to the Cumulus Hotel there in Kokkola. When I noticed from the corner of my eye this lady there, who is this type I so much like, you know, this sort of little bit artistic type. This nice energy around her, certain humor, just like Pipsa used to have. Just this nice energy. Maybe the kind of hair, you know, sort of Danish kind of hair, you know, that goes in all directions. That seems it hasn't been done, when in fact it has been done for 3 hours. So there she is, you know, and she comes to me with this humorous, positive energy and says, Esa, sorry, but I saw you here. I mean, this is such a funny coincidence because I happen to have one of your classic books from the 80s up there in my room. I mean, we are not talking about your 90s classics. We are talking about your 80s classics. I would say this is one of the 3 greatest books you've written in the 80s. And I can immediately see that the lady is aware of some of the key breakthroughs of Finnish non-fiction writing. So could I have your signature in the book? Sure, why not? So I get the key card, well, 4th floor, the same floor as she's on. Great. So we go to the elevator. It's a small elevator. And you know, this perfume, beautiful perfume. I'm feeling tired, but also happy of the gig. And in the elevator, I can already see that, you know, we are soul sisters. I can experience that from the fact that she's so excited about me. And let's assume that it would have resulted, this is speculative, but let's assume in this case, it would have resulted in an affair there in Kokkola. And understandable given the context. And then gradually to Pips, the special lady, the mother of my twins, and me separating. But time goes. And then they are, the boys, let's say 20. And we are in the Finnish rally. I know some of the Finnish rally drivers personally. I'm excited about rally driving. I think it's a great sport. So we are there. I've gotten some VIP tickets, waiting for the leading cars to come. And then all of a sudden, the other one of the twins says, Daddy, there's something we've often discussed together. And that is the theme as to why did Mommy and you divorce when we were small? I mean, Daddy, we don't have anything against these girlfriends of yours. For instance, this Jamaican cellist, very exciting. But Daddy, surely you can't compare these ladies to Mommy. I mean, there's so much you share. Even today, you know, one can sense that there's this connectivity is enormous. I mean, Daddy, what went wrong? And let's assume I would reply, well, once the situation at the Cumulus Hotel in Kokkola was such that X and Y. I mean, picturing the situation from this reflective angle, I think pinpoints so clearly as to how cheaply it went. But when the situation is undergoing, it's difficult to sort of see the values. I mean, if you are just equipped with thinking instrumentally, you don't really know what the values are ultimately. But of course, you could know to some extent, you know, where are the lines? For instance, somebody could think about faithfulness in marriage already in advance. In fact, I have thought about it. I mean, initially I was just so much in love with Pips, the special lady, I wouldn't even think about any other women. I mean, I was so in love. And she's such a tremendous personality anyway, you know, such a huge human being. I've learned so much from her. I wouldn't be doing these kind of lectures if it wasn't for her. I mean, in every respect, you know, she's given me so much, but it's not only what she has given me. It's also what she is. But I also know I'm a human being. I'm a man. As a man, some women influence me, I've noticed, on the system one level. You know, I'm shaking hands with people, come to my lecture, you know, and very often, well, we are now about maybe 90. So it's relatively small. But often I would have hundreds of people. I'm there at the door, shaking hands with people. And, you know, all kinds of people come. Some very, very attractive ladies, from my point of view, subjectively, do come. And I'm there, you know, shaking hands. And you know, sometimes the irresistible desire comes on the system one level to check out the lady from behind. I mean, this is sort of painful to admit, but this is a fact. If I just sort of look from the helicopter, this is what comes to my mind, to check the lady from behind. But of course I can't do it. I mean, I have to shake hands, but of course occasionally I need to check how many people are there in the room. So the theme of intrinsic values, instrumental values, I mean, think about it this way. This is one of my favorite films, Casablanca. with Ingrid Bergman and Humphrey Bogart, the leading role. It's such a beautiful scene there. There are, of course, quite a few of them, but from the point of view of this particular theme, such a beautiful scene where a person with the name Mr. Ferrari comes in, and this wealthy guy, Mr. Ferrari, who comes in, wants to buy Rick's bar. Rick being the character played by Humphrey Bogart. So he says, "I'd like to buy your bar." And Rick, the role played by Humphrey Bogart, answers, "It's not for sale." "You haven't heard my offer. It's not for sale at any price." It's a possible answer. And I think it's such an exciting answer. You know, it's not for sale for any price. So I mean, sometimes it could be that you can gain something instrumentally by doing so and so as opposed to this and that. Of course, we want to develop our thinking and our practices, our routines, our instantaneous system one decision capabilities from the point of view of the various instrumental possibilities, because life is about instrumental possibilities also. But life is not only about instrumental possibilities. It's, I think, a key feature of human life as opposed to some other life. But it's that other dimension to which we have access through our reflective realm. But the reflective realm we don't necessarily exercise was the point from the first part. So it's that discourse within ourselves that I hope that our situations here in Design Factory would facilitate. But also perhaps as they would facilitate it here, would perhaps encourage you to engage with also in the future regarding the kind of themes, regarding the kind of problems, issues, themes, experiences that are significant from your point of view. And keeping in mind the fact that that there's no telling what life to each of us brings. And then it could be too late when the moment arises to start to think, you know, what do I really believe in? What are the true things that I stand for? And thus this this concluding slide perhaps would be the conclusion of our discussion in this Pulp Wisdom lecture today. I think it's reaching out beyond our egos. It's reaching out beyond what the reactive side of us would in some situations suggest, towards doing what you do for something bigger. And of course, in the film Kill Bill, the something bigger is materialized or demonstrated or exemplified by the child. But it's the symbolicism of doing something beyond oneself that is, I think, the point there. Okay, dear friends, thank you very much for your concentration once again. We'll see. Thank you. Thank you.
We have quite a powerful second lecture behind us, and considering that there has only been like one weekend in between the first and the second lecture, our course has started quite powerfully and intensively. How do you feel about it?
Yes, you're right in pointing out the fact that it's just a few days since we started the effort. I think today my prime feeling really was that something is happening, and beautifully, I don't really know what it is that is happening, but the feeling was something quite remarkable was on the way, and we were riding the waves of something. and I quite look forward to continuing from this. Already the first lecture I felt to be quite powerful, particularly the feeling of connectedness in also made possible by the space here. It's sort of like a club or a campfire to some extent, rather than a huge setting in which I would be broadcasting some thoughts. This is more like playing together, and it's that playing together idea that is to me so important to work from. So I feel quite happy and also privileged to be able to do this here at Aalto.
Yeah, the energy was really remarkable today as well, and I think it's quite nice that we get to carry on already on Friday, so in like 5 days. How do you feel about the next upcoming lecture?
I did put quite a lot of effort into today's lecture, and also the way it got structured, and maybe some of the openings it offered, I thought came out pretty beautifully, and I was very happy with the way the orchestra played all of the tunes we had together. So quite honestly, I haven't really thought about the next lecture. It is though something to which I already made some remarks for even before we started in the first place. So I think we are going to have a powerful third experience here.
But you're right, let's first enjoy this one today. Thank you, Esa.
Thank you.